seeing, can everyone see the slides?
It looks great.
Yes.
Wonderful. So I will say off the bat, I did use AI to make a lot of these illustrations. And when I do, I have a little note at the bottom of when I used AI to make these illustrations modeled after one of my favorite books from the Lake Bluff Elementary School library, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And the topic of this talk is not just scary stories to tell in the dark, but scary stories to tell in the dark of a snake hibernaculum. So we're going to cover a lot of ground today. So here's just the table of contents for our talk today. We're going to go over some background. First off, who I am. We've already talked a bit about that. What ophidiophobia is. Also, what snakes are even. And then what a hibernaculum is, because that's where we're all going to gather to tell these scary stories. That'll be next. We'll talk about scary stories in a snake hibernaculum. And then to round out the talk, we'll talk about our complicated relationships with snakes over time, and then also living with snakes today, and maybe a bit of a positive spin on how we can continue to coexist with snakes in our urban environment. So without further ado, figuring out how to advance the slides here. There we go. My name is Will Vuyk. Who am I? I'm a ghost for Halloween this year, but I also really love snakes. This is an image of me holding a snake for the first time. And as we've been talking about, I'm from Shorewood, Wisconsin originally. I've spent a lot of time at the Urban Ecology Center, both in like summer camps, doing volunteer events, doing citizen science. And the Urban Ecology Center really was my first introduction to science, and not just science, but also ecology. And I've taken that with me into my schooling. I studied biology and history at UW-Madison, and my undergrad thesis was on snake populations in urban prairie restorations around Madison, modeled after the work that I'd done with Jen at the Urban Ecology Center. And now I'm a PhD student at Penn State. I'm working with an amazing interdisciplinary team of metagenomics, ancient experts, as well as archaeologists to look at human environmental interactions through time. And so because I'm now so closely associated with archaeologists, I have a scholarly obligation to reference Indiana Jones in my snake talks. I know, Indy, it's scary. Snakes are scary, but this is such a perfect example of the concept of ophidiophobia. Indiana Jones is terrified of snakes, and not just Indiana Jones, but most people have a fear of snakes, and there are good reasons for this. Additionally, some other examples of ophidiophobia. I like to talk about Carl Linnaeus, who's considered the father of modern taxonomy. He also had these choice words to say about snakes, that they're foul, loathsome, and abhorrent. We can leave these back in the 1700s. But again, it's completely normal. Like throughout time, across cultures, throughout people alive today, ophidiophobia is really prevalent. And not only is it normal, but it's actually kind of expected. And we're going to talk more about why ophidiophobia is really rational in lots of cases and is so prevalent across people as we go through the talk. But we first have to, before we dive more into ophidiophobia, we have to actually address what snakes are to begin with. And so snakes oftentimes defy a lot of the general stereotypes we put upon them. I like to use this example of this ancient snake ancestor called Najash that has been dated back to the Cretaceous period. So kind of the last big period where dinosaurs were still really prevalent on the earth, at least non-avian dinosaurs. And one interesting thing about this ancient snake is that, here we go. Can people see my cursor? It has legs. So snakes aren't necessarily legless. And even snakes today, especially boa constrictors, still have spurs, which are kind of like really reduced legs that they still have next to their cloaca in the back. And these spurs are still attached to a rudimentary pelvis. And they use, like, oftentimes the term vestigial is used, but these spurs are actually very much used by the snakes for gripping onto things and for locomotion. So again, snakes aren't necessarily legless. Maybe generally they are, but there also exist true legless lizards. So snakes, again, aren't legless lizards. There's a difference. between a legless lizard, which I have here, and a snake, like this Najash snake from the Cretaceous period. They're like paleontologists and archaeologists will use in like biological folks who study bones are able to actually look at the skull structure and easily distinguish snakes from any other kinds of reptiles. But for us, looking at a living animal, one of the easiest things to do is see whether it has eyelids or not. Because lizards have eyelids and snakes actually don't. Snakes don't have eyelids, they have spectacles, which are a modified scale that covers their eye, just kind of like all the scales on their body, except this one is clear and it acts like a windshield. They even cry underneath that windshield to clean their eyes, and they'll shed it off when they shed their skin and replace it with a nice shiny new one. Another thing to look for in identifying snakes is whether they have an external ear hole or not. So lizards have usually an external ear hole that's readily apparent. Snakes do not, and they actually, as has been touched on, I think it's in previous Backyard Naturalist videos, they use vibrations through the bones in their skull to hear. And so while this is a different means of hearing than we hear, they still definitely are capable of hearing. And I saw this headline in making this talk, and I had to include it, that there's a Scientific American article referring to a PLOS One research paper that confirms that snakes can indeed hear you scream when you cry in the terror of your ophidiophobia. Snakes will likely be able to hear that through vibrations in their skull. But some generalizations we can make about snakes is that all snakes are reptiles, and that means they're ectothermic or cold-blooded generally. And also all snakes are predatory. There are no herbivorous snakes. All snakes receive the vast majority of their energy and nutrients from eating other animals. And because they do that, they've developed lots of really ingenious ways of capturing and eating other animals. Of course, like their jaws can expand. They can swallow things that are much larger than anything that we could consider swallowing. They also are really good at constricting prey. They're really fast. But one of the most important things we're going to talk about today is how they're venomous. And so not all snakes are venomous, but those that are have developed lots of really sophisticated tools to envenomate their prey so that it's easier for them to eat. And that in particular is one of the real dangers of snakes to humans, is the fact that they're venomous. Luckily for us in Wisconsin, there are 22 snake species, and most of them are not venomous, especially the species you're going to find around the Urban Ecology Center. They're basically all harmless from what I remember seeing, especially around the Riverside Park area and the Menominee Valley location, are DeKay's brown snakes, Butler's garter snakes, especially in the Menominee Valley area. And these Butler's garter snakes are extra special because they're a species of special concern in the state right now for conservation, and also common garter snakes. And all three of these species are really exemplary in their abilities to survive in urban and human modified environments. And so it's also really cool that despite all of the things we've done in our urban landscapes, that we can still experience these snakes, and they continue to go about and do all the useful services that they do ecologically. Now is actually a really fantastic time to go out and see snakes, especially like late October, where the air is cool, but the sun is still warm. Snakes will be out basking and also migrating to their winter dens or hibernacula or hibernaculum singular. Because again, snakes are reptiles, they're cold-blooded, they need to use their environment to maintain their body temperature. How snakes do that in the winter is they slither down deep into rocky crevices that are able to insulate them from the freezing winter temperatures. And they'll also kind of coil around each other in many ways. Garter snakes are a great example of this, that they will den in large collective groups. So this here's the hibernaculum we're going to dive into to discuss our scary stories. And just to give you an idea of what this might look like, the best way I can describe it is like a giant coil of scaly spaghetti down in there during the winter. And I do think that the Indiana Jones films have done a fair job of representing this, with one caveat. Does anyone see any ear holes on these particular reptiles? Unfortunately, the movie studio filled their set with legless lizards instead of snakes, which should be a relief to Indy that his greatest fear is not actually in the bottom of this Egyptian tomb, but almost there, almost there. I thought this was a funny example of the snake lizard divide. So to recap, ophidiophobia is normal. Again, like in many ways, it makes a lot of sense because snakes are predatory and they have lots of tools that make them dangerous, including being venomous. And snakes, and here's kind of where I'm going to put a spin on the talk, that snakes, while we're afraid of them, they also have a lot of reasons to fear us too. And so as we think about the hibernaculum, where all of the garter snakes and brown snakes around the Urban Ecology Center are all now migrating for winter, I like to imagine a cute scene deep in that coil of scaly spaghetti where they wrap themselves around the torch of an unfortunate archaeologist and tell stories about the scary things they've encountered out in the humanized world. And so that's where we're going now. What kinds of stories, what kinds of scary stories would snakes tell each other before going to their winter dens? And I have some hypotheses about the things they may talk about. So here we go. I think one of the most scary things, if you're a snake, are lawnmowers. And I think this is pretty self-explanatory. I think if there was like a slasher movie made called The Mower, it would be very successful and very gory. And I'll let you fill in those details. But like that kind of is the reality that snakes face day to day, living in our urban and suburban environments where people are mowing lawns. One interesting hypothesis about lawnmowers too is that because snakes hear through vibrations through their skull, they may not be as in tune to the vibrations made in the ground by rolling contraptions, as opposed to the footfalls of large organisms. And so, again, this is a hypothesis that snakes may be less able to locate the exact location of the lawnmower, especially if you're walking behind it, as they may be more in tune with your footfalls than the rolling of the wheels of the lawnmower. So it's recommended that if you do want to avoid running over snakes, to walk your lawn to spook any of them first before getting out the mower. Because I'm going to give you all a chance to close your eyes here. What a snake looks like post lawnmower is pretty gruesome. I'll give you a count. I have an image here. So close your eyes if you want. 3, 2, 1. Ah, okay, it's gone. But really, there would be plenty of scary stories for snakes to tell about lawnmowers in our environment. And additionally, lawnmowers have lots of ecosystemic effects too, like, or I guess more like habitat level effects, where you're cutting the grass short, you're reducing the amount of microhabitat heterogeneity in your lawn, which is going to affect the amount of prey and the variety of prey available to snakes in a mowed lawn, as well as snakes, in addition to being predators, they often are prey. So also less places for snakes to hide from predators in really short mowed lawns. So a lot about lawns here in this presentation. Something else that is really scary for snakes is chemicals, because again, a lot of the pesticides and herbicides we're spraying in our environment are impacting snake food sources like insects, amphibians, and then also like there are lots of particular rodents, there are lots of particular chemicals to kill rodents, and rodents are also a big source of food for snakes. And so it's been found that snakes, in eating these prey items that are toxic, that those toxins will accumulate upwards through the trophic pyramid. So if you imagine spraying a bunch of herbicide on plants, that herbicide doesn't really degrade and instead is concentrated as plants are eaten by slugs, and as slugs are eaten by snakes, as you go up, more and more of that toxin becomes concentrated in individual organisms. And it's been found in snakes, especially, that lots of rat poisons, lots of environmental toxins, and lots of other chemicals accumulate in them because of what they're eating. And that can be lethal. Also, subsidized predators. Cats are well-known subsidized predators in our ecosystems. Birds are often talked about as a real source of prey for household cats. Household cats, outdoor cats, also eat lots of snakes, and maybe not just to eat them, but to kill them too, because the cats don't necessarily need the snakes for prey, but they kill them because they enjoy killing things. And so in my work, I've found a number of dead snakes that appear to have been killed by cats. But it's not just cats. Dogs, of course, will also kill snakes, and even wild animals that are subsidized in other ways, like raccoons and dumpsters, and also bird feeders, like this one here. There's still a lot of opportunity for these animals, even if they aren't needing the snakes necessarily for food, to still kill them, and their populations may be larger because of how we're subsidizing their diet. Another huge thing that snakes, I imagine snakes would be talking about in scary Halloween stories are cars and roads. So roads and cars especially have received a lot of attention in urban ecological research and literature, and how they fragment habitats and also cause mortality among organisms. Snakes are especially vulnerable to cars and roads, first off, because they can't move very fast. So they aren't able to get out of the way as easily. And also because they're actually drawn to pavement for its thermoregulative properties. So because they're cold-blooded, and asphalt soaks up heat so well from the sun, it will often draw snakes and other reptiles and amphibians to it to be run over by cars. Snakes also have a tendency to curl up and make themselves look as intimidating as possible to oncoming threats instead of trying to get out of the way. And that really is a bad strategy against a fast driving Mercedes like we have here. So snake mortality becomes really high when there are more roads. This is a GIS data set from the DNR that I've taken a screenshot of this is John Nolan Drive in Madison, kind of in the south of Madison. And there are some really great natural habitats here for snakes where we do find large populations, especially of DeKay's brown snakes. But we have a number of like 4 and 6 lane highways that there's absolutely no way that snakes are able to traverse this landscape in any great numbers without experiencing a lot of mortality. And so there have been studies done on the genetics of urban snake populations that have found that urban snake populations are really isolated from one another. There are these small pockets where they're able to exist, but they're not at all able to traverse the landscape, especially with large roads with fast driving cars. So again, cars, roads, really scary for snakes. And now, last but not least, humans are a huge, I would assume, would be a huge source of terror for snakes, especially because we ourselves are afraid of them. And so people will often kill snakes because they're so terrified. And again, it makes sense in certain situations, right? Like, especially if it's a venomous snake, that snake is a risk to your life. But in most cases, ophidiophobia results in the killing of snakes that maybe don't need to be killed. And so all of this together, from roads to cats to lawnmowers to just people whacking snakes with brooms, I think kind of turns our urban environment into the equivalent of like a spooky carnival funhouse. If a snake is slithering in there, chances are it's not coming back out. This is the moment the horror movie, like, no, don't go into the spooky carnival funhouse, because will likely result in injury or death, even if the clown looks nice. So to recap this section, snakes face decreased mobility and increased mortality in our urbanized landscapes, and this is seen across the world. So snakes are under threat generally. A lot due to habitat destruction and also how we're repurposing that destructed habitat. So agricultural systems and especially urban development. You can see the number or the percent of threatened species for snakes. It's this kind of dark purpley bar here. Snakes are really threatened both by agricultural and urban development. So plenty of reasons for snakes to have scary stories to tell about us. And it's because our relationship with snakes is really complicated. Of course, we have lots of reasons to be terrified of them. They have lots of reasons to be terrified of us. And this relationship goes back for millions of years. So we're going to now take a brief detour into that history. Taking us back to this particular snake here, the Najash snake back in the Cretaceous period, just to show you that snakes have been around for a long time. The fossil record pretty much, and again, snake fossils are really hard to find, but snakes begin to appear on the scene kind of in the mid to late era of the dinosaurs. And they also then survive the mass extinction event that kills off all non-avian dinosaurs, which is right here at the end of the Cretaceous period, about 65 million years ago. And there's a great series on YouTube called PBS Eons, and they have some really amazing videos on the story that I'm about to tell about the snake evolutionary arms race, they call it, with mammals happening once dinosaurs or non-avian dinosaurs have gone extinct and we enter the Cenozoic, or what's kind of commonly referred to as the age of mammals. So here we have dinosaurs. Oh no, they've gone extinct, and we're in the Cenozoic. Mammals really rapidly diversify and take over a lot of ecological niches, and really, are prevalent across the world and become a really good prey source for snakes, who also survive and are also doing a lot of adaptive radiation at this time. And so snakes become a really effective mammalian predator. So they are really good at capturing and constricting mammalian prey. They're really good at paralyzing and killing them with venom. Snakes also become really adept at seeking out warm-blooded mammalian prey with advanced heat-sensing organs. So mammals have a lot of evolutionary pressure put upon them by snake predation over these millions of years. Additionally, snakes run the risk of being stepped on or otherwise injured by large mammals. Of course, as mammals go from the small rodent-looking mammals that survived the extinction of the dinosaurs to what we think of in like the Pleistocene with mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses and all of those really large mammals. Snakes continue to use their venom as a defensive mechanism too. So all species of mammals, regardless of size, have a lot of selective pressure to either develop venom resistance to snakes, or another hypothesis is that ophidiophobia itself is kind of an adaptive behavior in mammals to avoid the dangers that snakes pose. So here, Indiana Jones is maybe representing a really adaptive evolutionary mammal behavior to the danger that this cobra is showing to him right now. Because again, I want to emphasize that ophidiophobia is adaptive, right? Like, according to the World Health Organization, around 100,000 people die each year from venomous snake bites around the world. This isn't really a problem in Wisconsin. No one's died in Wisconsin of a venomous snake bite in decades. But around the world, it's still like this is a public health crisis that's on the order of things that the World Health Organization is looking at. And it's not just today, but this has been a pressure on us basically our entire evolutionary existence. And so another hypothesis too, in how we've adapted to live in a world with snakes is something called the snake detection hypothesis. And this study, I think, shows it really well, where they took a group of people and they showed them images of a snake that had been sort of sequentially blurred until we get up here to step one, where it's just static. There's no way you can detect a pattern. And they then would show people step one, step two, step three, step four, all the way up to step 20. And they would ask them when they could identify what the subject of the image was. And so I don't know if you all can see this very well, but you may kind of begin to guess like, oh, where you would begin to tell if it's a snake or not. As it turns out, people are able to identify snakes much sooner in this stepwise fashion than other animals like birds, cats, or fish. So the snake is the top line here, that even at step 3, which I can barely tell there's a snake there, but there's a significant, like almost 50% of people are correctly identifying that there's a snake in this photo at step 3, which seems like pretty convincing evidence that we do have like some part of how our visual system has evolved is really innately able to detect snakes as they're camouflaged in the environment to protect us from potentially being killed by them or otherwise injured. We've also kind of taken stuff to the snakes too, right? There's evidence that we've eaten snakes ourselves instead of just being eaten by them, as has been true for many mammals. Humans, especially in some old archaeological records, we see snake bones that appear to have evidence of being digested. So this particular study looked at an assemblage or a grouping of archaeological reptile bones, mostly from about 15,000 years ago in what's now Israel, so a little bit north of Tel Aviv. And they did this really cool experimental archaeological study where they found snake bones in this assemblage, and then they tried to replicate the damage that had been done to them with modern bones. And they developed a protocol that seems to suggest that some of these bones, at least, were being used, eaten, and digested by people that were living at this site. So we kind of have this tit for tat relationship with snakes where they're a danger to us, and of course, we're also a danger to them in many ways. And again, snakes didn't take this lying down. Some of them, like cobras, actually reared up and developed in many different parts of the world simultaneously the ability to spit venom. As humans may have become more and more able to attack snakes from a range, especially because we're afraid of snakes and will often kill them on sight. There's a hypothesis again that snakes, especially spitting cobras, may have particularly evolved their ability to spit venom to scare people off and basically say, don't mess with me from a range that was safe for the snake. And again, this is just a hypothesis, but there is some convincing evidence that snakes, different types of cobras, or convergently evolved. So from different angles, evolved this same characteristic potentially in response to hominid exposure in different parts of the world. And another interesting point to this is that cobras are really good at hitting eyes, spitting cobras of people, around 5 or 6 feet tall. And humans also are pretty unique as mammals where we have frontward facing eyes, and these spitting cobras are really good at hitting us there. So again, more research needs to be done on this, but it seems to be an interesting hypothesis. Again, further evidence for this evolutionary arms race that we've seen throughout time between snakes and mammals, and also snakes particularly, and with primates and humans like us. Again, there are some great videos on PBS eons that go into this in more detail. So to recap this section, snakes have killed and eaten us and our mammalian ancestors for a very long time. We've also killed and eaten snakes. There's actually some recent news about people trying to do python farming for food as a sustainable source of meat. So we may continue to regularly eat snakes today. And our histories have really been deeply intertwined over a long period of time. And I think as well, kind of moving from the biology, this is also really apparent in mythology. That snakes have been a potent cultural force across the world throughout time. These are just 3 examples of really significant mythological snakes. Ouroboros, we have Quetzalcoatl, and the snake in the Garden of Eden. And so people have recognized and have told stories about how powerful and important snakes are for so long. Pivoting a little bit here, I've been thinking about snakes for a while, and I think it's time for me to tell my own story about a snake that may be kind of scary, given the theme of this talk. I had an experience this summer that really changed my view of snakes, even after working with them at the Urban Ecology Center, after working with them as a student. I think I only really began to realize this particular thing about snakes after what happened to me this summer, which occurred. It was my first experience doing graduate school research. I traveled with this great team I have of archaeologists down to the island of Ossabaw off the coast of Savannah, Georgia. And Savannah, Georgia is really known for its ghost stories. And a lot of the spooky things that happen along that entire eastern seaboard coastline. And so we traveled out from Savannah to this island, Ossabaw, that is really archaeologically significant because it has such a depth of human history that's really well preserved. The island is now protected as a preserve. It's owned by the state. And so when we arrived, again, there's this really deep history, but there really aren't many people living on the island today. And so all of that history just feels kind of quiet. We'd sit out on the dock and watch huge huge animals move through the grass of the salt marsh off in the distance, and we'd hear the wind whistling through the live oaks and their sphagnum moss, and there's just this atmosphere there of that you aren't quite seeing everything that's going on. The last permanent private resident of the island was a certified witch's apprentice. I kid you not, a certified witch's apprentice who lived in an elaborate estate on the north end of the island. And I had the chance to actually go look at this estate, and it's become a little dilapidated since she lived there. But I found books on spellcraft, which was quite interesting. And this all began to give shape to some of the rumors that I'd been hearing about the island. A number of people that had been there before me had warned me about the ghosts that exist, particularly in the place we were staying, which is an old hunting lodge that was built in the 1800s. It's been restored for people to stay in. And there were reports of doors opening and closing without really any evidence. Things would fall off of high shelves, especially people's metal water bottles that make a real racket in the middle of the night. All of these unexplained phenomena were happening, and I had originally brushed these off because I'm not someone to believe in things without a lot of clear evidence. But as I was experiencing this myself at this lodge, I began to worry a bit about what indeed was going on here. And one morning, I woke up really early. I got the amazing opportunity to go out with some DNR folks to look at sea turtle nesting in the morning, and that was a fantastic experience. But had to get up at 2 a.m. to go out with them. And so I woke up, and a buddy of mine, Matt, was also going on this expedition. And so I woke him up, and I went downstairs and made some breakfast. And Matt hadn't come down. It had been 15 minutes, and I got worried about him. And so quietly, I crept back up the stairs to look, and I see him standing stock still up at the top of the stairs, and he's got this worried look in his eyes. And I look down at his feet, and there's a 4-foot rat snake just slithering down the hallway like it owns the place. And we believe that this rat snake was likely the culprit for all of the paranormal phenomena that we were experiencing here on the island. But it really struck me that this snake was living with us in this house, eating all sorts of mice, likely, and other rodents that were living with us in the house. And despite all that I've said about how snakes are really susceptible to human habitation and our activities, I think too they're really resilient. That this snake could live in the walls of this lodge that people are inhabiting pretty much throughout the year, different teams of researchers, and go undetected, I think is really amazing. And so from this story, I've begun to think of how snakes and humans have interacted in a more beneficial way throughout time. So if we think about humans and our activities on the landscapes, it's well known both now and archaeologically that we have lots of species that really rely upon us to provide them with food, like those subsidized predators. Also, rodents are a species that are well known for being associated with human habitation. Think about rats in New York. And like throughout time, especially when people began to settle in agricultural towns, the abundance of food and grain brought a lot of rodents to human settlements. And of course, humans as well have been altering the landscape for thousands of years, especially with fire, making these fire-managed mosaics in the landscape that also in many ways promote habitat that's also beneficial for snakes and basking reptiles. And so in a way, snakes have been attracted to human habitation because of all of the other things that we've done ecosystemically by increasing rodent populations and by managing the landscape in the way that we have. And so this is a point that I want to make, that in many ways, like the things that we've done have attracted snakes and increased the amount of interaction we've had over very long periods of time. And so I want to make the argument that snakes, we can maybe consider them as synanthropic in maybe kind of a nuanced way. And whenever I think of synanthrope, the word, which I'm going to define in a second, I think about lycanthropes, which is a very similar word. This is another term for a werewolf, given our Halloween theme. And so both have Latin roots. Synanthrope means with humans, just as lycanthrope means wolf humans. So we really have no more to discuss about lycanthropes, but synanthrope, the official definition, is an undomesticated animal that benefits from close association with humans. So rats, again, are an obvious example. But I think in this more indirect way, I think snakes too fall under this category. And so I think this gives us a framework from which to understand that, yeah, like despite all of these difficulties that they experience, the spooky carnival funhouse of our urban environments that snakes have to navigate, they still do live with us today. And there's the fact that they're still able to, and the fact that they are still attracted to a lot of the things that we do, speaks to the fact that, well, we have been enemies evolutionarily for a long time. I think we also maybe more accurately termed as frenemies because of this way that we have these mutual interactions. And so I'd like to say that if love is impossible, right? Snakes are scary. I admit that. But at least we could have some neighborly respect with the snakes that we live with, because there are all of these ways that we benefit each other mutually. So I referenced the story about rat bite fever, that there are so many rodent-borne diseases that public health folks are terrified about that may become the next zoonotic pandemic. The more rodents are around us, the more likely that these pathogens are able to jump into people and really make a mess of things. Snakes eat rodents and in many ways control these populations. Also, predators control sick animals a lot more than, or at least proportionally more than healthy animals, so they can help regulate pathogen load in that way. Snakes have also been shown to eat invasive species like the jumping worms that are showing up all over Wisconsin right now. Lots of small snakes like garter snakes, DeKay's brown snakes, will consume these invasive species and incorporate them into the ecosystems that we have. And speaking of ecosystems, snakes perform a number of other really important ecosystemic processes, being mesopredators, both eating animals and other prey items at a lower trophic level, as well as providing prey for higher trophic level predators. And so the more we have snakes in our environment, the more easily that this trophic flow happens, and they fill lots of crucial roles in that way. So I like to think of snakes as an urban umbrella species because of all the antagonism that's happened between us and snakes over the course of time. If we're able to design the places that we live and are able to live in a way that allows us to coexist well with snakes, I think that will protect so many other species in our environment. So I think if we prove that we're able to live with snakes, in doing so, we'll have proven that we can coexist with so many other species that are important that also live on the world with us today. So I do hope that if this is the case, if this is where we end up going, that snakes, when they do huddle down in their hibernacula every October, they will have less scary stories to tell about us, and may be able to sleep a little bit better over the winter. And with that, thank you very much for listening to this talk. I wanted to show, this is the one photo I could find of me and my best friend, Garrison, at the Urban Ecology Center back many years ago. I think we were probably 6 or 7 at this time, just to show how much the Urban Ecology Center means to me and how much a part of my life it's been. So thank you all. It's been an honor.